Hi, welcome to Astrology for GAN Traders. My name is Olga Morales, and today I'm going to be looking at the total solar eclipse on the 4th of December 2021. Now, one of my favourite topics of research, even before I got into WD GAN, has been eclipses. I actually wrote a novel called Eclipse of the Soul, and you can do so much research on it, but they're one of the most fundamental things you need to study, in my opinion, when it comes to world events and personal events, and also for financial markets. Now, W.D. Gann wrote a novel called Tunnel Through the Air, and the last page is actually focuses on an eclipse that occurred in the 30th of August in 1932, right visible over New York. So there's a lot of eclipse stuff in that novel. Okay, so that's part of unraveling his coded novel, if you want to get into it. Okay, so let's get started. So what I've been doing of late, the last few years, is I always want to look at the eclipse. If we look at the eclipse here, this eclipse is coming that we're coming down the 4th of December is at 12 degrees of Sagittarius 22. Okay, so what I like to do is I've actually on this outer wheel they're called the decans. Okay, so the decans we divide the circle of 360 into little 10-degree segments, and they're called the decans. Now this originates from Egypt, where these 10 degrees was actually where the fixed stars were rising on the horizon or culminating. This is a culminating point on the midheaven, or setting at this point on the descendant. Okay, so there's a lot to focus back on that, and that's been obviously because of my interest in Egypt and all my travels there. I love using these decans. Now, the fixed stars also come into play. So I like to look at what fixed star, the actual eclipse is associated with, because this gives us a lot of information from ancient times. It's like they knew a lot of what was happening according to the science. I've also linked in, when you look at some of the decans, you can also, there's a system where you can connect to the tarot cards, which I plan to write a book on. Okay, so let's get started. And also, the other thing is I always look at declination when it comes to anything to do with eclipses, okay, because that's very central to world events and mundane forecasting. So let's have a look. If you've got some of the old mundane astrology books like Raphael's, he talks about the decans, depending where the eclipse is. It has a energy that they talk about, and in this particular one, in that the second decan of Sagittarius is ruled by the moon, but also in this it says he writes, this is from Raphael, deaths of camels, deer, buffalo, goats, sheep, cows. And I was thinking, how can we relate that to modern times? Could it be because there's not enough food for them? Is there a drought? Is there flooding? Or is there something like mad cow disease? Okay, now mad cow disease, I believe, last time happened around 36 years ago. So that's double the eclipse cycle. Okay, so maybe, unfortunately, this might occur. I'm just putting it out there. I don't know. The other thing is it's connected to the fixed star Antares. Now, Antares, it's actually the heart of the scorpion. Okay, it hasn't got a great reputation. Traditionally, the most violent star, dangers from fires, weapons, machinery, and a wounding, and also blindness. So there's a lot of issues with Antares. And Antares was also, Antares means anti-Mars. Aries was Mars because it's red and it's almost looked like Mars, so it's like a rival to Mars. And it was actually one of the royal stars around 3000 BC. It was called the Watcher of the West. Okay, so what I should say is the fixed signs have got very prominent fixed stars in them. And it's in one of the books that I've got, it says in the Bible it was called Shiloh. it has a reference to it. So, and Shiloh, I believe, if I remember my Bible studies, was to do with the Messiah coming back. You know, Shiloh is, and Shiloh will come. There's one of those quotes. So it's interesting how that relates to this eclipse, okay? I'm just putting out lots of things that I study. And also the wands, it's actually associated, the card associated with this, it's ruled by the moon in Sagittarius, and it's the Nine of Wands. And the wands is always to do with fire. Okay, so there's a lot of energy in that, emotional energy because of the fire sign. But the actual picture of the person in this card is actually a person who's already been in battle because he's wounded, and he's got his wand, so like that he's been fighting. So is it a continued battle, or has he surrendered to something? So there's something. And number 9, we look at the numerology, so it's an ending of something. It's like an ending of a battle. So be interesting what that means. But there's some sort of energy, fire, some sort of wound. We could literally have fires as well in there. Now, the other thing we need to do, I should have said this before I started on all the other stuff, is what eclipse, there's what Saros cycle it belongs to. Saros is a family. Eclipses belong to families that go around like the serpent around the egg, and they start from either the North or South Pole, and they continue around until they disappear again. They start and then they disappear, and there's usually about 70 to 72 eclipses for each family or each Saros. So anyway, what I did, you can learn more about these in my courses, okay? But what I did is, it's always really good to go back every 18 years and have a look at the eclipses from the same Saros. If you want to do really great research, especially if you're a GAN person, you probably know what this links into. You need to go back and have a look. I've done it myself. I always do this because that gives me an edge on what I'm researching and also what my predictions. So I've done the work for you if you don't know how to find the Saros cycle. So these are some of the dates that go back, and you can see that every 18, because there's an 18-year plus 10 to 11 days, there's always about a shift of 10 to 11 degrees in the zodiac, okay? So you can see that it will go back approximately 10 to 11 days each time it comes, every 18 years. So it actually fits perfectly into all the decans. So I believe that's, a good way to watch it. So look, have a look back at 2003, 1985, 67, 49, 31, and 13. Okay, all these numbers. And what I like too, when you add 18 to some of these numbers, 18 years, you get a mirror image, something about numerology in there. Okay, so have a look back at what you think about some of these years and what was happening on a world level, or people that were born in those years, because they're going to be having a return of their Saros, because we're all born with the prenatal eclipse Saros. We belong to a family. And I've done a lot of lectures on this. So we belong to a family, and often people that we attract into our lives belong to that family too. So it's really good to do some research, especially if you've met someone and you felt, oh, I know you from somewhere. You have that instant karmic connection to that person. Obviously, it's not obviously, but sometimes, most prominently, you will have a karmic connection, and it comes into your Saros cycle. So have a look at that. Great research, and have a look at people that have had an impact on the world, and see every time they have a return of their Saros, what happens. Because usually they say, when I did a lot of this work in the early years, the nodes always bring you into the return of your nodal cycle it's a blossoming time, so it brings you back into public awareness or world affairs. So it'd be interesting to see what you find with those people. So anyway, and the other thing is, as I said earlier, we always have to, well, I believe I always do it. This is my way of looking at things. You can never ignore declination. We need to look at declination, because sometimes you might say that, the eclipse doesn't really make any hard aspects to anything. There's no real hard aspects in there that I should be worried about. But they're completely different energy when you have a look at the declination. And this is what you need to know as well. So don't ignore it. So I've got a declination panel in here, okay? So you can see that for this eclipse, Mars and Saturn are actually parallel, okay? And you can check here. So Mars is at 23 Scorpio and Saturn's at 9 Aquarius. So you think, oh, they don't make an aspect. But if we look at their declination, you can see that they're both, so southern declination, that means southern, 1832 and 1843. So there's only a couple of minutes between them. So they're actually looked at parallel. But this is important for mundane forecasting. And also you can see that the eclipse, even though you can't see, it makes no aspect to, no known aspect to Pluto. But you can see that in declination, it's actually Pluto's at the midpoint of the eclipse. So this is, intense energy here. And the other thing we need to see is that Mercury and Venus, the inner planets, are actually out of bounds, okay? So that has a lot of impact on weather. Anytime a planet's out of bounds, above the tropical, that's 23.5 degrees at the moment, it's termed out of bounds, and they often have their energy is amplified, so they have more of, they call them mavericks. And Venus is known to bring water, so rain and flooding, and Mercury is known to bring wind. If you look at your meteorology book, so that's interesting to all put together. So because of that, I would make a prediction that this eclipse is not going to be as easy as some people might think it's going to be. Okay, so let's have a look. If you're new to astrology, you can also, this is all my charts. For these charts are from Solar5 that I've been using for years. So they've got so much stuff to help you with astrology. I highly recommend it. So you can get a grid as well, besides the aspects of the planets. You can also, on the other side of the grid, you get the declination grid, okay? So you can see how they're all clustered around here, but you can see that this little sign means parallel, like two parallel lines. If there's a cross, that means contraparallel, which means like they're in opposition, and that's Chiron and Neptune are contraparallel. So you can see here, there's Chiron and Neptune contraparallel. It's like an opposition. So one's north and one's south at the same sort of degree, almost exactly the same degree. You can also say these two, Uranus and Jupiter, almost contraparallel. Okay, so these are important to see how that works. But then we can put it on the graphic ephemeris, which of course is my all-time favorite tool. That shows you everything. So this is a declination from the moon out for 2021. Okay, and also I have all the new and full moons plotted on this chart. These ones here, that means that's a solar eclipse because it looks like a conjunction. When it looks like an opposition here, that's a lunar eclipse. So we're interested at the moment. We're coming to this point. Now, can you see what's happening here? All the clustering, there's a whole lot of clustering. So the moon, as I said to you before, this brown line here is Pluto. Okay, remember I said the eclipse is in between Pluto. Then you can see Mars going through Saturn. Okay, and then just that cluster is basically the cluster this cluster here. So it's really good to have a look at this on these charts. So to me, I already know by looking at that, this is a southern eclipse on the south node. It's in a southern declination. It will have more impact on the southern hemisphere. Okay, so it's very important to look at this, and you can see how Venus is, like, this is Venus, the green line. You can see that she's been out of bounds for probably the beginning of November, okay? And then you can see that Mercury out of bounds, that's the limit where the sun is. So you can see the limit of the sun, if you follow this line, is at 23.5 degrees, okay? So these planets out of bounds cause a lot of issues, mainly in weather, okay? And so you need to know about those, obviously, for forecasting for commodities especially. Okay, so let's have a look at, then I've plotted the eclipse on the world map. This is again in solar fire. And this eclipse is it's in just above Antarctica here, okay, under South America. So this is the central pathway, but then these are all the partial pathways, where you can possibly see a little bit of it. It touches through like Melbourne, okay, of course here. Now, the interesting thing is this eclipse is going to be going, on above Antarctica, so it's southern hemisphere, but it's just sort of touched Africa. Okay, so it's interesting that we've had the new variant, Omicron, that supposedly was from South Africa. And it's interesting that we've got it in Australia. I know it's gone to other places, but that might be the way that it travels. Okay, so this Paran lines, this is a focus that this section here is where they're on Paran, which means they're on the angles. It's going through like the tropical area here. So this area is going to be important for these eclipses. Now, eclipses are often connected to earthquakes and very volcanic eruptions. So because there's an alignment of the Earth, the Sun and the Moon, it's like a big pull, and that creates more instability. And there's a high correlation between eclipses and earthquakes. And it's interesting that we've just had this week a huge 7.5 in Peru. Okay, so the line is going through there. So the other thing is we need to know where the eclipse lines. We can see that there's a line going through Bombay in India and into this area here, all these countries. Okay, going through, culminating over this central part of the United States and Mexico. And also, and that's about it in this side, okay? So, but in Australia, it's interesting that it's rising through Melbourne, and I think that, we're in a focus. Melbourne, everyone knows that our lockdowns have been the harshest, and this eclipse is still being triggered. And also they're trying to pass a huge pandemic bill that will put us into more restrictions if it goes past. So it's interesting that we're in this at the moment. We're experiencing it ourselves. So that's what it looks like. So maybe something to do with Antarctica comes into the news as well. There's a lot of, interesting conspiracy theories around Antarctica. It's what's hidden under there. And also maybe about the ice. I know people believe that there are pyramids there, and once the ice melts, you can actually see them. So maybe we get some insights into something from Antarctica. We might find a treasure or something. It'll be interesting to see if anything like that happens. So anyway, we need to also look at what eclipses do for the stock market, and often you'll get some sort of reaction. Sometimes it's worse than others, and that's basically based on the energy of the eclipse, as I just showed you. Some are quite mild in terms of planetary aspects, but others aren't. So you need to look back. This is part of the research you do. I teach a lot about this in my courses. So, have a look. This is just going back, okay? Every 6 months or so we're going to have, sometimes we have triple, and sometimes just double. So have a look at what you think. And if you want to do proper research, you should be going back to these eclipses and saying, okay, how come this one had this reaction, okay? And how come this one had this reaction? What sign were they in? What aspects were they making? So it's really up to the person, individual person, to do the research and not depend on someone else. I mean, that's the whole point of what my teachings are. It's not for me to tell you. It's for you to work out yourself, so you don't have to depend on anybody. You depend on your own work and your own research. Okay, thank you. Hope you enjoyed that. It's one of the most amazing topics of research. Just a little glimpse of what we might be able to expect. And thank you for listening. And my website is astrologyforgaytraders.com.au. And please like give me a bit of a like if you want, and also subscribe to my channel. I'm trying to build it up again. I was sort of dormant for a few years, and people have said, can you come back? I actually love doing this. And the reality is I probably won't be traveling again next year, 2022, because I don't think it's going to be good for traveling at all. So my aim is probably to start traveling 2023, and hopefully I can have people back to Australia so I can do my workshops. But until then, I'll be doing more of these. So thank you for listening.